For the Len Wein panel. Gentlemen, take a seat. Mark, take a seat. Thank you. All right. We are talking here for a minute about, this panel was conceived the evening Len passed. Was it 3 weeks ago? It was not very recently. And it was not a shock to a lot of us because Len had been sick for a long time. In fact, as long as I've known that, I met Len in 1970, and we corresponded before that. People kept telling me, you know, Len's not going to be around much longer. And a lot of the people who said that died before he did, which I like a lot in certain ways. But it was inevitable eventually we would lose this man because he went through a lot of sickness and a lot of illness, mostly kidney related. He had a lot of things wrong with him. But we want to talk about the things that Len had right with him. Now we have two panelists who have to leave us for other engagements here, so I'm going to let Jerry Ordway talk first, and then Tom King, and then we'll talk. And anybody who wants to say something about Len can get in here. Jerry, what do you want to say about Len?
I just wanted to say it hit me hard too. I mean, if you knew Len, he was a really great guy. The thing for me I wanted to say is that when I first worked with him, I was new. It was my first regular assignment. I worked on All-Star Squadron, and he was so good to someone like me starting out. He kind of ran interference between Roy Thomas and me, and I mean not in a bad way, but he was very protective, but he was also very nurturing, and he was also very much a fan of the stuff. And I really did like the guy, and I always loved seeing him and talking to him. And I feel really terrible because he really was a good guy. And he was a super talented guy. That's really it. I just wanted to get that in there.
Thank you, Jerry.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brother Jerry. You want to go someplace else also, so let's say you talk.
It's just so stupid because I would love to just listen. I too quit Len Wein's service. I would not claim to be his friend or to know him that well. I just knew him, you know, conning next to him and all that kind of thing.
He wouldn't have let you.
Yeah, no. Yeah, because
That's funny because Len liked everybody.
Yeah. But I'm like a super nerd. Every time I met him, I'd be like, so tell me about editing, watch me. First time I met Len Wein, it was really embarrassing, mostly for me. And I was at a convention, this convention, like 8 years ago or something, and I had not been a professional comic book writer, and he was sitting at a table, he had no line at all. And in my head, I'm like, this guy, he made Wolverine, and like people are in line to like, you know, see like previews of the Wolverine movie for like 3 hours lines, and and he's by himself. And so I was like, I'm gonna show him what a great fan I am, so I'm gonna go up and tell him that, which is stupid. So I literally went up to him. This is like my first time talking to a comic book creator ever. And I'm like, dude, you're Len Wein. You should be as famous as Stan Lee. What the fuck? and which is a dick move to say to anybody that you should be more famous. And he sat back, and there was like a long pause where I kind of realized how dick move it was. And he crossed his arms, and he just looked at me and goes, kid, I am as famous as Stan Lee. You just don't know it. It's my introduction. I go, thank you, Mr. Wein. Second story is more sentimental. I had this big gig early in my career. I was going through this Batman #1, and I've been doing these small little artsy-fartsy books, and suddenly I was on this big book which was selling hundreds of thousands, and the whole company was depending on me and everything. And I wrote the book, and I was writing the third or fourth issue, and I went through, and a lot of people put me off, so I was like, I hate it. I'm not writing well, I'm not doing my artsy-fartsy stuff, I'm writing crappy, and the reviews were kind of a little iffy, and I was just like, I'm failing here, and I should give up, and I should just walk away and do artsy-fartsy people get window books. And my editor called me totally out of the blue, and was like, I got a note this morning, and I wanted to share it with you, because I know you're kind of in a panic mode. I was like, well, what did you do? Len Wein called me out of nowhere, just not apropos of anything, not for work, just said, he read your issue #1 of Batman, and he loved it. He thought it was one of the best Batman issues he's ever read. I'm not trying to brag. Maybe my editor was exaggerating. Maybe the stories exist, but it gave me sort of that confidence to sort of go forward, because I was totally about to quit. And I was like, if Len Wein wrote it, because I worshipped his stuff, and I've Wolverine, I was like, okay, there must be something in there must be something in me, and just the inspiration from taking that moment, it really sort of drove my career forward. I wouldn't be still writing Batman if you hadn't sort of sent that note. So just an appreciative of a guy who sort of made my career and puts food on the table for my kids. So thank you, wherever.
I want to talk a little bit about there's good and bad. When you have a tragedy like losing a friend, beloved friend, you can focus on the negative, you can focus on the positive. Now, let me say some positive things. Unlike a lot of people, Len lived long enough to see his work become very iconic, to see it become motion pictures, to see it become and reap some of the rewards from that. And I don't mean just financial rewards, personal rewards, rewards of satisfaction, rewards of pride. There are a lot of people who created great characters who never saw those characters reach the heights they could reach. Len, not that Wolverine won't be even more famous in the future, but Len got to see Wolverine known the world over, and the Swamp Thing characters and the other things he did turn into, and to reach some rewards from it. He had a very happy second marriage to a wonderful woman named Chris Fallada. They were together for 20 years, and you could say, gee, that's not enough, and you'd be right. But you can also say, given that here was a guy who kept being, the people kept predicting Len's going to last the next 2 years or 4 years or whatever, who kept being in and out of hospitals and having medical problems, you can say, my God, he got 20 years, or still 20 or more than 20 years out of that relationship, and that's a positive you can focus on. You can focus on the fact that Len got to become an elder statesman of comics, and to be regarded like someone like Tom does, as someone. There was a time when Len's praise wouldn't have meant as much to a new person in comics, but Len had built up this. History had given Len a certain prominence and expertise and value in his work that made him important enough that someone could react as kids who just heard Tom react. Obviously, the negatives are, I can't go see my friend Len for lunch anymore. We don't have his next story, we don't have his next script and things like that. You can look at these both ways, and they're valid both ways. I knew Len, since 1970. He was a very impossible to dislike person. He was always very happy. He had a great laugh. I judge people up by whether they laugh at the right things at the right time. And Len laughed. We would just sit around and tell dirty jokes sometimes for an hour. Things like that. And when you hit a good one, and Len would keel over, you'd feel very proud of yourself. You'd feel like Tim Conway making Harvey Korman break up. It was very proud. You were happy with that. Like Len had given you a gift by laughing that way. And he loved comics, and he loved people who loved comics. He was very happy in this business. Even the people who wronged him, and there were some, Len couldn't stay that mad at them sometimes because they were some of the people who did good comics, and that made up for it in a certain way. I'm going to let everybody else here say whatever comes to mind there, but I'll have a few more thoughts about it later on. But if you didn't get a chance to meet this guy, I'm sorry, because you would have liked him a lot. And I did. Elliot, you want to go next? Sure, here, take my mic.
Well, Len was the first guy who made me feel at home doing this stuff. I really didn't know anybody in the business when I first got started. Had never really been active in the fan community or that. I was still in school and happened to sell a script. I had a stroke of luck, and I was in and out of town. I'd stay for a couple of days or a weekend or something, and I'd have a meeting and I'd go back. And so that summer sometime, Len and Jerry Conway and Mark Hannafeld were just sitting around in the coffee room in DC, and Len said, out of nowhere, he says, "We decided you're one of us." I said, "Geez, cool." I didn't know that.
Wow.
He said that to me. I know, weird. So he's been my friend ever since. That's like 46, 47 years ago.
Wow.
Got a phone call about 3 or 4 months ago. And I hadn't heard from Len in a few months, and nobody had, I guess. All I knew is he took a header and he cracked a spinal bone, and he had to have it operated on, or else, his whole thing would have separated. And I get this phone call, and it says on the phone, Len, and it was his voice on the other end. This is about 9:30, 10 o'clock at night. His voice on the other end, I absolutely didn't recognize. It was hoarse and weird and deep, and the voice said, Michael, is that you? And I said, no, there's no Michael here. He said, I said, who's this? He said, who's that? I said, it's Elliot. You're calling from Len's phone. Is this Len? He says, yeah. I'm trying to call my kid. I wanted him to do something for me. I said, what do you want him to do? He said, buddy, would you do me a favor? I said, sure. I hadn't heard from him. I knew he'd been through an operation, and I didn't know how he was. So it was like a thrill to find out he was sitting in a hospital room recovering. This is 2-3 weeks after the operation. And he says, would you go to Five Guys and get me a load of very, very dark, well-done fries? I said, which hospital are you in? He says, Northridge. I said, okay. So the Five Guys like 3 blocks away. I said, so I'll go there. It was like just before they closed, I made it. And I got them to do 2 big, huge things of fries. I mean, it's an awful place, and delicious fries. And,
True.
and you can always get into a hospital. You go in the emergency room, you make up a lie, and you get in. He told me what room he's in, so I found my way through the hospital and to this room. And this is maybe 45 minutes after he called me. I really, I beat feet. And he was out cold. So I had 2 things of fries, one for him, one for me. I put one on the hospital table, and I sat down in a chair, and I said there was this hot nurse, so I went over and talked to her. I said, how do I get this guy to wake up? She says, shake him real hard. I said, he just broke his neck. How do I shake him? She says, okay, then don't shake him real hard. Maybe he'll wake up. So I sat there for about 45 minutes eating fries, and I get this phone call the next morning. I left the fries there. I get this phone call the next morning from Chris, who says, did you bring Len fries? What are you, crazy? I said, my friend is in the hospital. I haven't seen him in months, and he asked me for fries. What am I going to do? Say I'm not going to bring him fries? Come on. I'm going to bring him tripe? Bring him a plate of asparagus? What do you want? So we made an agreement that I would check the menu with her beforehand. So that wasn't the last time I saw Len, but it was one of the last times. But it was such a relief to see him breathing,
Sure.
Great. Yeah. What are you going to do? Who's next?
Being a rotten moderator, I forgot to introduce people. This is Stonewall Simonson, this is Elliot S. Magan, this is Bob Greenberger, and this is Mark Wade.
And this is Mark Evanier.
That's right. Oh, yes. Everybody knows who I am. If someone's hosting a panel, who else would it be? Anyway, I've got down to the point now where I go to the men's room. If there's more than 3 people sitting, it's considered a panel. Bob, you want to talk about that a bit?
Back in the dim, dark days of the 70s, the conventions were smaller, and the writers and the artists didn't have tables, and they were wandering the aisles, filling in their back issue collection like the rest of us. And that's where I got to know Len and Marv. And then when I was at Starlight Press and I was doing Comic Scene, I was interviewing Len and Marv and talking to them for the magazine. So when they needed an assistant editor for Crisis in Who's Who, Len was one of the people to go to bat to bring me over to DC. And on my first day at the office, Len and Karen greeted me and welcomed me and said, "You're now a member of SWAS." And I look at them and I go, "What is that?" They said, "Save Ween's Ass Society." Len was having a rough writing spot and would take a bunch of us to lunch to a local diner once a month to plot Green Lantern for Dave Gibbons. And I thought, okay, he'll buy me a burger, I'll help him with whatever. I had no idea what I was doing yet because I was just in the door. But it became a monthly tutorial. It became an opportunity to sit with Len and figure out how to piece a story together. And then, as we were working on Who's Who, and we were starting to figure out who should draw which character, I was getting Len's instruction on matching character to artist and penciler to inker. And then when I was asked to start helping him out on the Batman books, it was then all the other nuts and bolts of the magazine, which was great. I mean, I was, without realizing it, Len was, the first significant teacher I had in becoming a comic book editor. And given everything he had done up to that moment, I couldn't think of a better person on a day-to-day basis to do that for me. And a lot of what I, have been doing ever since is because of that first year together. And I didn't realize that or didn't think much about it until Paul Levitz called to give me the bad news. And I've been thinking about it ever since.
All right. I want to talk about him as a fan for a second. I mean, again, I knew him, I loved him. I most appreciated the fact that from the day I met him, he treated me as a peer, which blew my mind. I grew up reading their stuff, and yet he always treated me like a peer. But I grew up reading his stuff, and I tell you the exact, whoa, we lose.
No, you're good.
No,
You're
okay.
suggesting.
The moment I fell in love with Len's work, I found him at exactly the right time. I found him when I was like 11, 12 years old. And stuff was kind of dry then, but Len had a sense of humor to his work. And my favorite Len Wein moment of all time was this Justice League story, in which the opening scene is that the Injustice Society is broken out of prison, and all these villains all around the world are doing stuff. There's Shadow Thief over there, and there's Poison Ivy in Gotham. And the Justice League decides to deal with this, and so Batman says, all right, I'll deal with Poison Ivy, and Green Lantern, you would deal with Sinestro, or whatever. And Elongated Man says, we do this all the time. We always go after our own villains. We should mix it up. We should just put the names in a hat and draw names and switch up villains. And Batman's like, no. And then Green Lantern and Flash go, he's got a point. Let's just do this. Let's do that. And so Batman gets all grumpy and says, all right, but you'll have to find your own hat. Now, that joke really works. It actually works on another level, too, when you stop to think about the fact that Elongated Man has no villains. There's no dog in the hunt, Batman, I'm going to take Joker, you would take the Barn Door Bandit. But that's when I fell in love with his work. Give me one more second about something else. And I hate to have stolen this from somebody else if you were going to lead up to this, but how many people watch Jeopardy? So, for those of you who don't, this question was read as the final Jeopardy question a couple of weeks ago, not long after Len passed. He was told to create a character called this. Len Wein learned the real animal is short, hairy, and will attack an enemy 10 times its size. Forgetting for a moment, 2 of the morons got wrong. It's not just that Len Wein got his name in a final Jeopardy answer, which is cool. It's that they taped these shows months in advance. This was not a tribute to Len. This was just the measure of impact he had on pop culture that his name came up. I just found that amazing.
Wow. Yeah.
And Len was a devout watcher of Jeopardy, and his wife Chris was a Jeopardy champion.
Oh.
So,
Len was a devout watcher of, I think, everything.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, he was like that.
There was that stretch when he was just at the tail end of his editorial run at DC. He would come in about 1 o'clock every day because he had to watch his soaps first, and then recount what he had watched to those of us in the office because he had such passion for it. 1987, during Hurricane Gloria, many of us in the New York area were losing power, gaining power, losing power. Len calls me. I'm at home because we're all batting down the hatches. He calls, he goes, do you have power? I said, so far. He said, great, tonight's the season premiere of Twilight, so can you tape it for me?
I went to Vegas a couple times with Len, and it was bad thing in this regard. We would buy tickets for a show, and they would tell us, be back here at 9 o'clock sharp for seating. And then Len would go off and we'd split up and he'd go off and he'd play video poker and I'd go to the blackjack table and, lose my house or something. And I would get back to the room, the place we were supposed to go to be at 9, I'd get back there at 8:55. Len would get back there at 8:59:40. He would always be, and nobody ever cut life shorter than, cut time shorter than Len. So the plan was we were going to go to shows, and we would alternate. I picked the show one night, he picked the show another night. So he picked the show, we went to see it, it was a good show. And then I picked the show. I said, we're going to go to the Stardust Hotel and see Into the Night. And Len said, what's that? And I said, it's sort of a review. It's one of these big reviews with showgirls and acts and things like that. He said, why have you picked that? I said, because George Carl is playing there. He said, George Carl? And I said, no, George Carl. How many people have heard of who George Carl was? Okay. Go to YouTube someday and look up George Carl, C-A-R-L, no N on it. He is the most brilliant pantomime comic who ever lived. He is hysterically funny. He's a guy he was the lead act at Crazy Horse Saloon in Paris for 20 years. He comes out, and his act, he says, and I'm not exaggerating, his act is he gets tangled in the microphone cord for 20 minutes, and it's the funniest thing you've ever seen in your life. So Len says to me, who is it? I said, the guy gets tangled in the microphone cord. He said, what? I said, trust me, man, the guy gets tangled in the microphone cord. He said, that's an act? I said, yes, it's an act. I said, it is. Don't worry, there are naked women in the show. There are naked women in the show. So we go, and there are indeed naked women in the show, and we're watching the naked women in the show, and there's more naked women in the show, and still more naked, and Len is enjoying the naked women in the show. And then they say, ladies and gentlemen, the comedy star of our show, George Carl. And Len looks at me like, this had better be damn good. And out comes this little man who looks like Buster Keaton. And as I said, go to YouTube, find where George Carl was on with Johnny Carson, and you will laugh your ass off for 20 minutes. It's at the Sunday clip. And he did 20 minutes of this, and we are in hysterics. You're just howling. And at the end of when George Carl goes off, Len stands up in the Stardust Hotel and yells, bring back no naked women, bring back the George Carl. No more naked women, please. and I just, we had to, you got to the end, you started laughing ridiculously. We were at a Comic-Con in Chicago one time, and there was a cocktail party, and there was a style going around in this country of dress for about a week or so, where men were wearing these suits that were like 3 sizes too big. Remember this? There was like, if you wore a size 40 suit, you bought a size 46, and everything was like pulled tight and stuff like that. And there was a comic book artist there who came up to let him understand that we were not dressed that way. This guy was wearing this really bizarre things. And he talked to us and he walked off. And I turned to Len and said, women love a man in a big suit. And Len started laughing at this. And the next day we went to the airport together, and we're walking around the airport saying, ooh, look at that suitcase. I bet that has a big suit in it. Oh, that suitcase can hold 3 or 4 big suits. And we are making ourselves laugh so sick over this that airport security came up to see who the 2 drunk guys were. and I don't drink, and Len hardly drank at all. And we explained to them, no, we're laughing at big suits. And for the next, 4 or 5 years, you could make Len. What you would do is you wait till Len was drinking like a Diet 7-Up, and he had it, just as he get in, you'd say, big suit, Len, and he would pass the Diet 7-Up through his nose. It was a very lovely thing to do, time it right. You could get him to do a spit take that Daddy Thomas would have envied. He was just so full of funny, and I laughed all the time, even when tragic things happened. He was a very devoted guy to comics. He loved comics. He loved people who loved comics. He did a lot of nice things for people in comics who needed a job or needed help here and there. And so, anyway, I could just tell you stories about Len laughing himself sick for a while here. Is there anyone in the audience who would like to say something about Len, working with Len, or knowing Len, or reading his comics? Or we can just keep babbling on up here for a while.
Well, people are waiting. Len loved comics, was happy to talk comics. He was happy to be exposed to new talent. Len was one of the first in the United States to discover 2000 AD when it came out, and was paying attention to who those creators were, and was able to start going, I want to work with these guys. You know, obviously Len brought us Alan Moore, but he also helped spot Dave Gibbons and Alan Davis and Brian Bolland and all these other people. He paid attention. He was a large consumer of not just the DC stuff, but what was out there. So he could see what was going on, and he could see a trend way ahead of the rest of editorial. But he also just brought that passion. It was still fun to read comics, even though he was making them.
Yeah. Well, you did Thor with Len, and then you did it on your own.
I did.
You want to talk about the difference there? I mean,
Well, I don't have any really funny Len Wein stories. I love Len. We worked together well. I was stunned but not surprised when Len died. His health hadn't been good. I think it was kind of true for all of us. I wasn't really expecting it, but it was not surprising. It was still stunning. I'm still not very happy about it. But the very first job I ever did in comic books profession was a Len Wein story. Now, we remember how it came about differently. Len was wrong. He's not here to defend himself, so I'm okay. But essentially, I walked into DC one day with a portfolio. I had the good fortune, completely by accident, to show my portfolio to Carmen Infantino, at the time was the editor-in-chief or publisher, or whatever his official title was. Carmen liked my work. He called in 3 of his editors, and he made them all give me a short story, back at the time when DC Comics had a lot of short stories in the back, especially the war books. So I ended up getting and Joe Orlando was one of the guys who had to give me a story. So Joe walked in his office, he pulled out a Len Wein script, an inventory job he had on his desk, 6 pages, whatever it was, handed that to me. That became my very first story. By pencil, I inked it. I think I lettered it too, much to Jack Abbott's displeasure. And, it was just a silly war horror story. It worked out fine. But Len and I became friends. I didn't go over to Marvel until, I came to Comics 72, didn't go to Marvel about 76, I'm going to say, 77. And somewhere around 77, I think Len was probably the editor of Thor. They still had editor-writers at the time, I think. And offered me the job writing it. I think that's how it worked. We're not really, I talked to him actually a couple of months ago, because Marvel's reached a point in their Master of Works series where they're about to reprint the 12 issues that Len and I did together. And so I scanned a bunch of the artwork I have from those series. They could have better art to scan, to shoot from. And called Len up. They asked me if I would write an introduction for the book. And I called Len up. And I said, well, gee, wouldn't Len be a better idea for writing an introduction? It's been a long time. And I was told, well, Len doesn't really feel he can do it now. He can concentrate enough to really write it. So I called him up. I ended up with Christina. I talked to her for a while. I had a long talk with her what was going on with Len, so let's kind of find out what was happening. So then Len called me back. He was off in dialysis at the time. He called me back. We had a nice long chat. And I told Len, I said, listen, you want to write a paragraph? I'll stick it in the middle of the introduction. He felt he couldn't even really do that, which is kind of when I thought things weren't doing too well, really. But we had a great talk. It was fun to go over the old days. In that stuff, we used to plot together. I mean, mostly it's Len. He was happy to have help. We would just grab lunch together. We'd shoot the breeze in the office. A lot of those stories came out of our love for Thor, for the old Kirby Lee comics. I wouldn't say I had a lot of deal in the plotting, but I had some. But it was a very smooth working relationship. One story I will tell. I don't always tell this because it sounds like bragging. Probably it is. But Len has told the story elsewhere. He told me, before I got the book, John Buscema was drawing it. As far as I'm concerned, there's hardly anybody in the business, an artist, who's a better storyteller and artist, draftsman than John Buscema. So I took over. I tried to draw a little like John. Pardon me. But I didn't want the book to look radically different from what had gone before. Tony was doing finishes, so it did stay pretty much the same for a while. But when I was doing it, I tried to keep it the same. And Len and I did stories with the Asgardian stuff. We tried to get as much of the Asgard stuff. And what we were doing at the time, I would do layouts. I've seen the layouts recently. I have my Xeroxes of them. I always Tony around so I could thank him for saving my ass, because I looked at this like, oh my God, look at the reminded this stuff. This was awful. He did a great job. But Len has told me that it would take him about 4 days or whatever it was to write a job you sent on Thor. It took him about 2 to write mine. I don't know if that's because I had less stuff in mine. I liked it because I told smoother stories. But I'm not sure that'd be true of anything job he sent to Drew. So he was able to write my stuff rapidly at a time when you couldn't always write stuff rapidly.